Hey devs, welcome to WebStylePress. If you are new here, consider subscribing and hit bell icon. Few years back, to handle HTML designs, we had just HTML tables and CSS. Then came tableless websites that we work with by using divs. Along with that came media queries for responsiveness. We have to use some kind of grid system to manage data in every website. For that, we used CSS floats. CSS floats were not ideal. So then came Flexbox. Flexbox is great, but it's still some tedious work. If you know how to play with CSS Grid, you will forget about Flexbox. Well, not completely, but you will still use Flexbox with CSS Grid, but you will find it easier to handle complex and random grids in CSS Grid system. But why do we need CSS Grid? Isn't Flexbox flexible enough? The answer is we need CSS Grid. I give you an example. You have used table, TD, colspan, right? You can merge TDs and TRs with colspan and rowspan, but there are no such things in Flexbox. Flexbox has got just raw and then columns inside raw. Columns cannot be merged, not vertically, in case of Flexbox. Let's say you have to merge a part of second row with some part of first row. How would you do that by using Flexbox? You cannot. This is where CSS Grid helps. CSS Grid lets you create more flexible layouts than CSS Flexbox. Now CSS Grid is tough to work with, but in this video I will share a technique that how can you use a simple tool to create any kind of responsive CSS Grid based layout. We will create a CSS grid having columns in random orientation. We will apply image background to each column and we will apply responsiveness to this grid. Let's do this. In CSS grid, we define rows and columns. Then we mark regions for those rows and columns. It's two-dimensional grid system for CSS. I have got this HTML page and here is the output. I also have got these 6 images bg-1, bg-2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and this is my custom.css, index.html and I am using Sass. This Sass will be converted into CSS file and these are the images that I have used from Pixabay. These are free images, you can also use these. Let me close these windows. So this is the website. This is called as grid.layoutit.com and as you can see it has got grid columns, grid rows, grid gap. Let's use 10 pixel grid gap. And you can create your CSS grid by using this tool. And as you can see, we have got 3 rows and 3 columns in this grid, and FR means fraction. We will use FR as a unit for the grid system. And here you can see we have got the code. I will just copy this div. It has got a class grid container. So this is our container and then we need columns. So we need 6 columns. Let's give these classes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So this is our container and these are our columns, and we have got classes as grid container and 1 2 3 4 5 6. Let's save these, and this is the structure that we need for our HTML. And this is our CSS. So let's generate our grid. So this is the structure of our grid, and you can add rows and add columns here, but we will need 3 columns and 3 rows. And you can click at the column and you can select columns and then mark the area. So I am selecting 2 of these columns and I am giving the name for the area 1. And this is my area 2. This is the area 3. Type the area name and hit enter. And then this will be these 2 columns. Area name is 4. These 2 columns, area 5, and this will be 6. So as you can see, we have got the code here now. So let's copy this. So for our grid container, we will use display grid and grid template columns. There are 3 columns and each column is equal. FR means fraction, right? And then grid template rows, we have got 3 rows. Each row is equal, and then grid gap is 10 pixel. Let's use 20 pixels. And then background color for now, let's use black to just demonstrate the columns. And then width 100% and height 100%. This is the height and width of our grid container. Also, I want to use the padding for the body. (20 pixel), and then I will need these. So these are the area definitions. So we have got the area definitions as classes 1 2 3 4 5 6, and we have got these divs with the same classes. So let's save it. So instead of these all classes, I can just use grid container, and then I can target div inside it, because this is our structure and there are just divs inside grid container. So I want to use background color for this one. I want the background color for the columns. And now if we will see, you can see our grid system. So these are actually 2 columns, and then these are 2 columns, and these are 2 columns. And this kind of structure is not possible with the Flexbox. And it is responsive as well. We will add breakpoints to this grid system. Let's add background images for these columns. So let's use background image URL page-1.jpg. So for each column we are giving a background image. So these are our background images, but let's improve the background images, positions and sizes. So background repeat, no repeat, and then background size will be cover, and then background position 50%, 50%. It should be centered vertically and horizontally, and this looks better. Let's enhance this grid a little bit further. Box shadow, inset, and then 60 pixel, and border 4 pixels, solid and black. So how will you add responsiveness to this? Now for smaller screens, I want these columns to change. As you can see, for smaller screens, these columns really have small space for them. So I want to change these, I want to adjust these, I want to stack these columns on top of each other for smaller devices. Let's add two media queries for our container and for this one. So for our container, let's add media all and max width 1200px. So this is our one media query, and the second media query is our breakpoint will be 991. Similarly, we want these here as well. And also for this one. So these are our two breakpoints. So we defined the grid container here, but this grid container will shift its columns for this breakpoint below 1200px, and then below 991 this grid will again change. So instead of three columns in a row for smaller screen, smaller than 1200px, I want two columns in the row. Let's refresh the page, and now I want 3 rows but 2 columns, and for that I need this orientation. Well, gap and display grid is same. This is the change that I need to use in my media query, so this one. And now our grid template columns and grid template rows have changed. So we need to implement the change over here as well. So we will have to define the areas again. Let's say this is 1 and this is 2 and this is 3 and this is 4, 5 and 6. So we got our 6 columns. So this is the new orientation and area definition that we've got. So let's use it inside 1200px breakpoint. And now 991. So for 991 I need one column and one column in a row, and then I need 6 rows. So there are 6 rows and one column in a row. So 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We are using same classes names. So this is the orientation for this breakpoint 991 for our columns. And these two we need for this breakpoint for our container. Right, so this was our grid container, and the grid container had got 3 columns and 3 rows. But for screens lower than 1200 and 1200px, we shifted these columns, and then we have got the 2 columns and 3 rows. And in the 991px screen scenario and lower than that, we have got 1 column in a row, and then we have got 6 rows. This was the orientation for our areas, and then it was changed for the Media Guru 1200px and 991px. So refresh the page, and then we will change the width of the screen. And then as you can see, now the columns are 2 in a row. And then for even smaller screen, we have got 6 columns, but each row has got 1 column. But as you can see, these images are smaller in height now. I want to give them minimum height. So grid container div for MediaQuery 1200px, I want to use height as 400px. Let's use minimum height because we have got no content in the columns, and columns have got background. So let's check this again, and now we change the width of the screen, and it looks better now, and it has got scroll now, and the images are fine, backgrounds are fine, and this is our even more smaller screen. Let me toggle the inspector toolbar, and now this is the, let's use 1200px, enter, and as you can see there are 2 columns in a row. And if we change it to 991px, as you can see there is 1 column in 1 row, and there are 6 rows and 6 columns, and over top of each other. I can go further and add more elements to this example and make it more complex, but I will save that for another detailed video on CSS grids. So stay tuned. That's it for me, guys. I hope you liked this video. If I missed anything or you have something to add, you can comment it down below. Ask questions related to this topic. If you haven't already subscribed, subscribe to the channel and hit bell icon to receive updates. Join us on social media. Links are in the description below. Stay tuned for more updates. I will see you in the next video.